visit to the world's most beautiful mosques begins on a holiday in Cairo, Egypt. Among the colorful crowd thronging this square on a Thursday afternoon, the day before the day of prayer, dedicated to the appointment with God in the mosque. The Ibn Tulun Mosque dates back to the 9th century and is one of the world's oldest. Built of fired bricks faced with stucco, it is impressively large. The ground plan is similar to those of huge pre-Islamic buildings found in Mesopotamia. The Mosque of Al-Azhar in the center of Cairo was built in the 10th century. Like many other mosques, it serves both as a house of God and as a house of knowledge. In the shadow of the historic university where Islamic culture has been taught for centuries, a huge crowd meets every Friday to attend the week's most important religious event. Prayer times are the most important moments in the lives of all Muslims. When the outward rite is over, the rituality of the spirit continues. Here at Al-Azhar, the university has always encouraged the thirst for knowledge. This artisan is working on a cloth embroidered with sacred Arabic lettering that will serve as a cover for the Kaaba, the black stone that stands in the main square in Mecca. All Muslims are obliged to make at least one pilgrimage, known as Hajj, to this square in the heart of Mecca. Every moment of the day, somewhere in the world, a Muslim is prostrating himself in prayer, his face turned towards the sacred black stone. One of the rules established by the Prophet Muhammad obliges all pilgrims to walk 7 times around the black stone, which is always covered by an embroidered cloth. Is Medina, where Muhammad died. The Prophet is also buried in this holy city. Eastern mosques, the houses of God and wisdom. Of Islam in the Arabian desert conjures up images of an inhospitable, sun-baked world void of life. But for the nomads who live here, life is the desert itself, where every kind of miracle is possible. Here, every evening, the house of God can rise from the sand. In the words of Muhammad, the prophet, mark out an area for prayer, and that will be your mosque. From the world's oldest, most humble mosque to one of 1,000 20th century mosques. From the windy, empty spaces of the desert to the noisy traffic of a modern Islamic city in the Middle East. This mosque shows how in the span of 1,200 years, the Muslim holy house acquired two additional elements, the dome and the minaret. Another stop on this tour of Middle Eastern mosques brings us to one of the most magnificent and most venerated of all the houses of God built by the Muslims. The location is Jerusalem. These are the walls of the old city, so full of biblical mysticism. Always a trading center, Jerusalem has seen many conflicts. A holy city for the Christians, the Jews, and the Muslims, it has been fought over by all three factions in violent, bloody wars. The dome of the rock mosque, Qubat al-Sakra, reaches into the sky in the center of the city. At the end of the 5th century, the Caliph Abd al-Malik built this holy place on the rock that, according to legend, was the site of Abraham's sacrifice. The old part of the city dates back to the Middle Ages and has survived more or less intact. Time seems to have stood still for centuries in this picturesque, low-income quarter that still reflects the street plan illustrated in ancient miniatures. Often, the prophet is portrayed winging into the air on his celestial journey. The takeoff point is said to be the Holy Rock, now buried in the foundations of the mosque that dominates the city. This is the impact the Caliph desired for the building. Now, the Mosque of the Rock is not only a religious symbol, but also a political one for all Islam. And so is Jerusalem. There are Christian buildings here, too, and the remains of Jewish temples from the days of ancient Israel. Jerusalem to Damascus, the capital of Syria. An obligatory visit for anyone touring the splendors of Islam. In Damascus, too, the old city dates back to the Middle Ages. At its center is the great souk, the covered market. Rapid expansion in the last few decades that has seen burgeoning ultra-modern developments has not touched the old city. In the 8th century A.D., the Arabs conquered Damascus, which became the site of one of their most magnificent mosques. Built by Al-Walid between 706 and 715 AD, the mosque stands on the site of a Roman temple dedicated to Jupiter Damascenus. The mosque served a political purpose as well as a religious one. It was built to give Muslims in Damascus a monument that could compete with the great Syrian Christian cathedrals. The severe interior is breathtakingly beautiful. Our next stop lies in a land torn by strife. The Gulf War did not put an end to the violence and barbarity that seems endemic in Iraq. In the region sacred to Islam that lies between the Euphrates and Tigris rivers are some of the country's most famous mosques. In Baghdad, a modern mosque and a monument to the country's dictator hide scenes of devastation. Iraq has always been a troubled region, divided as it is between two sects, the Shia and the Sunni. Today, as in the past, the Sunnis are in the majority. The Shiites inhabit only a part of the country and can also be found in Iran and India. The Sunnis have always championed the community of the faithful, that they consider the sole guardian of Islam's laws and traditions. The Shia community has contested the Sunnis ever since the death of the Prophet, because the Sunnis consider Ali, Muhammad's son-in-law, the fourth caliph, while for the Shiites he is the first, and all those who preceded him were usurpers. The ongoing dispute continues in the shadow of these golden mosques, a perennial power struggle over who can claim the role of caliph. The Sunnis consider all members of the Prophet's tribe eligible, while the Shiites limit the honor to the direct heirs of the Prophet Muhammad. For outsiders, it is difficult to understand who has led Islam through the course of history. A caliph who, as far as the Sunnis are concerned, has no religious authority, or the Imam, considered infallible by the Shiites. Contrasting beliefs and bloody conflicts have not stopped the building of golden mosques. In Samarra, Kerbala, and Kufa, these glistening buildings all appear to have been designed by the same architect. In fact, for the most orthodox side of Islam, an artwork is the result of a strictly applied formula, which does not allow for free interpretation. This is the first time the interior of the mosque in Kerbala has been filmed. The solemn magnificence is striking. An atmosphere laden with spirituality envelops the silver enclosure which denotes for the Shiites the site where their caliph died. The Supreme Avenger, who will rise again to avenge the death of Ali and all the Shiites who have been persecuted throughout the ages. It is said that the Shiites' religious fervor expresses the eternal mystery of the human soul in all the pain of its existence. This is why their faith appears so bathed in passion and secrecy, so full of allegories and hidden symbolic meanings, heavily influenced by the esoteric religions that abounded in the East in ancient times. Since the early days of man's existence, Persia, now modern Iran, has seen a succession of different civilizations. From the Achaemenid dynasty, with its 2 lines of kings, to the Seleucian and Sasanian dynasties. In 650 AD, the country was invaded by the forces of Islam that brought with them a new style of religious architecture, which reached the peak of its artistic expression at the end of the 15th century after the Mongolian invasions. The creators of this breathtaking splendor were the Safavids of Kurdish origin, descended from the holy man Sayyid Safi ad-Din. Their architectural wonders can be seen in small towns and in famous cities alike. Meshed, with its imposing mosque built on the site of the tomb of the Imam Ali al-Riza, was the country's most important religious center during the Safavid dynasty. But the Safavids' masterpieces are in Isfahan, where Shah Abbas transferred his capital at the end of the 16th century. This is the famous K.L. Satun, or Pavilion of the 40 Columns, today at the mercy of thoughtless tourists. The mosques of Isfahan are veritable jewels of harmonious inlay work, like the majestic Masjid-i-Sah. And this one dedicated to the prayers of the Shah's mother, the Madrasa-e-Madar. From the golden domes of Iraq to those clad with precious tiles, the intricacy and magnificence of Eastern Islamic art take the visitor's breath away. Majestic, perfectly proportioned buildings whose architectonic volumes are fused by the sumptuous facing of decorative glazed tiling. In and around Tehran, snowfalls are not unusual during the winter. But the mantle of white is not thick enough to hide the splendors of Islam. This is the city's largest mosque. This kind of light seems to give added definition to the building's shapes and spaces. Our itinerary takes us even farther east, skirting war-torn Afghanistan by passing through small, isolated towns in Central Asia. Pakistan is the completely Muslim part of the Indian subcontinent. Its name means land of the pure. The The capital of Punjab province is the country's second largest city, Lahore. There is an outstanding example of the Indian Red Mosque, so called because of its red decoration. The mosque in Delhi and many other such monuments throughout India are in the same unmistakable style, built during the Mughal Empire by the kings who united the country. More splendors of the Mughal Empire await us as we leave Pakistan for India. Here there are hundreds and hundreds of mosques to visit, but we have limited our tour to two. The first is in Hyderabad, in the heart of the vast subcontinent. This Muslim holy city is pleasantly hospitable, its magical atmosphere deeply laced with an intangible sense of Oriental mysticism. Hyderabad's Islamic treasure trove is to be found in its gallery of royal tombs, which hold the remains of kings whose names are unknown to outsiders. Kings who played key roles in the clash between the inflexible dogma of the prophet and the ambiguous, subtle world of ancient India. Devotion to 1,000 idols, challenged by a religion that worshipped a single god. An ongoing conflict that continues to divide modern India. From marvelous architecture to equally marvelous music, everything in India's Islamic culture seems to have an inherent elegance. For better or for worse, the Muslim invasion transformed this country forever. In the 9th century AD, many ethnic groups, especially in the south, still lived in primitive conditions. Like this tribe from Orissa. A small part of the over 40 million people who refuse, even today, to accept changes brought about in the course of history. In the days of the first Islamic invasion, India was inhabited by communities like this, living at different levels of social evolution. Some only a few hundred kilometers apart, but separated by thousands of years. Primitive peoples who have nothing, and who want nothing to do with big cities, and a world where traditions and lifestyles have slowly been adapted to meet a new reality, influenced in many cases by the arrival of Islam. One of the Indian cities with a very pronounced Islamic component is Delhi. Here, the course of history has left its mark, clearly visible in the many impressive monuments that are, in turn, dominated by the city's imposing mosque, the Red House of God, built by Mughal princes. Philippines, we reach the far eastern borders of Islam. According to local legends, the Prophet Muhammad arrived here on the back of Burak, the magic bird, bringing with him the wind of Islam. The inhabitants of Mindanao and Sulu saw the divine creature land and were bathed in the light of the prophet. From that day on, they dedicated their lives and all they owned to worshiping Islam. On Talak Sangay, a small building is under construction. The first mosque on this microscopic island, the most remote and most eastern of the countless mosques that have sprung up in these outer reaches of Islam. Little more than a large hut compared with those we have seen so far, it is nonetheless just as important, an outpost of the faith. This unknown, unpretentious mosque with its larger famous brothers represents the soul and the glory of Islam's artistic expression. According to Francesco Gabrielli, one of the world's leading experts on Arab culture, the word mosque comes from the Arab masjid, that means place of devotion, a house for all believers, but also a seat of education. Knowledge continues to be passed down from one generation to the next within the mosque itself, as well as in ancillary buildings that house schools and often a university. It can be said that for the Islamic religion, the mosque has the same function as the agora for the Greeks and the forum in ancient Roman times. It is the living center of community life where ideas and news are exchanged. "1,300 years after the birth of Islam, that jewel retains the same luster as it first acquired in the burning deserts of Arabia."
Is 25 years long enough? Could be. There it is. A tremendous home run.
In order to banish the new idea,
This Millennium Minute has been made possible by the National Endowment for the Humanities.